Today's episode contains adult themes that are not suitable for young children's ears. If you have little ones near you, please listen with headphones or come back and listen when they're not around.
It's time now for HomeWord with Jim Burns, helping families succeed. Here now is your host, Jim Burns.
Well, welcome to HomeWord. I am Jim Burns, and we're ready for another podcast with Lucille Williams. I'm so excited she's back, and at HomeWord, we're trying to help families succeed. Well, we're going to help you succeed in your marriage today because we're going to talk about marriage, and it's such a treat to have Lucille with us. Now, here's what I want to say. We're going to talk about physical intimacy. We're going to talk about sexuality. Actually, Lucille's pretty blunt on this. I can be blunt, but she can be blunter, if that's a word. And so I'm going to ask you that if you've got a child in the car, you've got a child at home, then either put on those earbuds or listen to this at a different time because, again, we want to talk to you about your marriage. And you're going to get some sex advice from a pastor's wife today. Oh, my. Lucille, welcome to the program.
Hello, thrilled to be here.
Well, great to be with you. I mentioned on a previous podcast that I read your book, The Intimacy You Crave, straight talk about sex and pancakes. I've got to ask you about pancakes later. But I mentioned that, I blushed reading some of this. Very God-honoring, very wonderful. But, you didn't hold back. Now, you wrote the book for women, but you should see the book that I'm holding up right now. It is underlined almost on every page saying, Kathy, listen, Kathy. No, I didn't. I'm kidding on that. But anyway, I think you have some great content here, and I'm so glad we get to jump into it. So let's jump into it. Is that okay?
Great.
So the word intimacy is an interesting word because, again, women kind of get it. They get it as connection. Men think intimacy is only sexual intimacy. Obviously, there's other types of intimacy. But I find that when we start talking about sexual intimacy, when we start talking about sex, people get awkward. Why do you think that is?
I think many of us have had experiences as kids growing up in the church. You're just not supposed to talk about those things. And, sometimes I remember as a kid, my mom would say to me, I better not catch you kissing any boys. You're boy crazy. Yeah. And so I was feeling like, oh, that side of me must be bad because my mom keeps telling me to stay away from the boys. But I was always drawn to the boys. So what do you do with those feelings? And then you get married and you have all this baggage that you had throughout your growing up years, and that stuff doesn't go away.
Yeah. It's interesting that you say that because one of the other reasons it's probably awkward, your mom said don't kiss boys, but she probably didn't give you a lot of great insight. But I was speaking last week to 700 men at a Mariners Church here in Southern California, one of my favorite churches, Mariners Church men's breakfast on sexual intimacy. And believe me, the speaker does not want to have to talk on that, but they asked me to talk on it. And I said, how many of you received good, positive, healthy sex education? Now, there's 700 plus men there. I counted 6 raise their hand. So that means that their parents didn't talk to them about this. So it was off limits for parents to have that conversation. Yet, interesting enough, we now know, and this is a side note about kids, but all research shows that the more positive, value-centered sex education kids receive from home, the less promiscuous they'll be. But it is awkward, isn't it? I mean, you speak to women all the time. Your book was written to women. It's awkward.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It is. It is really awkward. And my adult children, my son and daughter, have been in the audience when you've asked that question, and they were one of the few who raised their hands. That was so one of the things that we did right. Yeah. My husband and I, we let them talk about it, and we talked about it with them, and they both have really healthy marriages. So to your point, it's true. Yeah. We need to talk about those things with our kids.
It's great. Now, my kids did it differently. Christy said we were in Hawaii, just recently, and all of our whole family, and we were talking about Jim, the dad, talking about sex to people a lot. And she goes, well, Dad, you thought you did a good job, but you were really awkward with us. You could speak to thousands of people on this subject. And as soon as you talk to us, your bald head sweat, your ears turn red, and you started stuttering. And then all of the other girls, my daughters, are like, yeah, that is so true, of course. But they do feel more comfortable having those conversations. It's a safe place. Mm-hmm. When you started speaking, when you started writing on this subject, now we're turning it to women for just a minute, they finally found somebody who was safe for them. And don't they have a deep desire to actually talk about some of their issues, but they don't know where to turn?
That's true. I've had a lot of women come to me with a lot of questions because they just don't know what's okay, and especially girls that are engaged.
Yeah.
I always know when they're hanging around and they're lingering, and then they come up to me and they're like, "Listen, I'm engaged," and I know exactly what they're going to ask. They want to know what's okay in the bedroom,
Yeah.
and so I'll have a dialogue with them. But at the end of the day, I tell them the Bible says in marriage. So you can knock yourself out in marriage. And if it's okay with you and it's okay with him, then it's okay. Because a lot of people have gotten some really crazy advice in that area, but we can't add things to the Bible that aren't there.
We have weird tapes in our head. Or, I don't think I do as much, interesting enough, because I wasn't raised in a Christian home. But some Christians have very weird tapes in their head. Don't do it because it's dirty, rotten, and horrible. So save that dirty, rotten, horrible, ugly thing until you're married. Well, yeah, but it's not so dirty, rotten, and horrible. In fact, in your book, you said sex is fun. I actually laughed when I saw this. Sex is fun, because I don't hear people say that, but sex is fun. God created sex, and he created it with pleasure. So, yeah, sex is fun. At the same time, you write in the book about being sexually abused when you were a child. And you're very open about this. And so there's a lot of people, when they hear you say, oh, no, it's fun and there's pleasure, they're running it through the grid of abuse. 1 out of 3 women are sexually abused by the time they're 19 years old. 1 out of 5, 1 out of 6 men. What do you say to the woman who says, I can't really say it's all that fun? Because they're running it through that grid of sexual abuse, like when you were young.
Yeah. Well, first, I would say, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry for what happened to you. It shouldn't have happened. It was wrong. And especially was not your fault. And you can't really just shed like easy light on this. You can't just say, oh, no big deal. Just push it aside. No, it is a big deal. It's horrible and it can destroy you. But if there is something that is messing with your marriage currently, you need to look at it. And you need to go, if I'm not having fun, you need to say why. And then you need to unpack it. Sometimes it's just a conversation with your spouse about it. And sometimes that's all that needs to happen is go, you know what? This is reminding me of what happened to me as a kid, and I'm really struggling. Sometimes we need to get professional help and unpack those things. But there is so much help out there now, and it does not have to be a hindrance today to your marriage. You can get past it if you get the help that you need. Yeah.
Too many people, I think, have these secrets. One would be sexual abuse, of course. Other times it might be that they lived a life of promiscuity. Sometimes they haven't even shared this. In a book that I wrote called Getting Ready for Marriage, and I know you have a great book on premarital as well. But in those, sometimes when I was doing premarital counseling, I would say, are there any, is there any baggage? And, well, I didn't want to really tell you. They were like 3 weeks from the wedding. I didn't really want to tell you, but I was abused when I was a child by, Uncle so-and-so, and he's coming to the wedding. And you're like, we should have talked about this earlier. The question I want to ask you is, there's secrets out there. What do you do with those secrets? Do you just immediately share that with your spouse, or do you get help from a counselor, or is it kind of either or?
Well, I think we all have a different journey, and sometimes we have a secret, but we don't even think about sharing it because we're so ashamed and we're so embarrassed, and we don't want to tell our spouse. But once you're married, it's coming out. It's definitely going to come out. And I know for me, one of the biggest secrets that I held in my marriage, my husband didn't know this, but when he married me, I was struggling with bulimia. Yeah. And that's not something you can hide from your spouse after you're married. And it was because of Mike discovering it and saying, this is not okay. And he told my family, told his family, told my friends, and it caused me to get help. And he literally saved my life because I got help after. But it wasn't something I thought I should tell him, because when you have a secret like that, you don't tell people. It had been a secret for years. There was no way I was going to tell him. But when it came out, he lovingly encouraged me to do what I needed to do to get the help I needed to stop.
Lucille, that's a wonderful illustration of intimacy, because intimacy means connection. And so you received love. I feel like that with Kathy in my life, that there have been many times where she's been kind of the hands of God, the mouthpiece of God, the voice of God to me. She's saying, well, I love you. You're being an idiot, or you've had a bad experience. I'm so sorry for that. However, I love you anyway. Now let's go get some help. Right. That's what we want in a marriage. That's where you get in. We're not just talking about sexual intimacy, although you and I, that's our focus today. But you got to have intimacy, and that means you got to be open to whatever is going on in your life. And so to not share your story of bulimia was saying, I don't know if you still will love me. And yet you saw firsthand that, no, he offered love and said, we can't stay like this. We need some help. Appreciate that.
Right. And it's those kind of things, like when he loved me in spite of the things that he learned about me, that's when the intimacy got deeper. And that's when I learned I could trust him.
Yeah, that's a beautiful way of saying that. Now, I've often said, and you've probably heard me talk about this because we've done enough things to where you've been at or together, that one of the biggest problems in America is this breathless pace in which we live our lives. I know there's a lot of people listening to the podcast outside of America, and I think they would say the same thing, right? But busyness oftentimes impacts our intimacy. HomeWord did a study a few years back, and we asked people at our Refreshing Your Marriages, what hinders you from having good sexual intimacy? Number one thing, busyness and exhaustion.
Busyness. Yep.
More than just, I don't like my husband or I don't like my wife. It was busyness. Speak to the issue of busyness and intimacy.
Yes. Busyness can swallow anybody up, especially when you're raising kids. I mean, I remember you're picking them up at school, you're doing this, you got the projects, you've got that, you've got church, it doesn't stop. Right. But you have to pull out that calendar, and I know that's old, or just look at your week and say, okay, does my week reflect what's most important to me? And if intimacy isn't up in the top, something's wrong. You have to have time for that. You have to have fun with your spouse. And, us women, we need to connect emotionally. So men, you got to spend time talking and connecting emotionally, because they're not going to want to get, in the fun zone without the emotional connection. But you've got to make that time. And I know for me, when my kids were little, I realized, okay, this can get swallowed up really fast. So I would look at my days, and sometimes I'd be like, okay, hon, I got 30 minutes. You got 30 minutes right now. After this 30 minutes, this window is closed for the rest of the day. So if you want to take this 30 minutes. He
wasn't complaining about it, I would imagine.
No, it wasn't real sexy, but it was all I had. So I was always looking for those windows where I could say, okay, here's the window. And you could take it or leave it, but here's the window. And so I always made sure that was there. That's
really good. And so, we are busy, but we have to take the lead when it comes to just, I've found that in our busyness, sometimes I would give Kathy only my emotional scraps. And I think women do that with their husbands sometimes too. And so we have to find time, even if it's 30 minutes, to connect. And that becomes a beautiful thing. And it just can't go away or say, in the next season, that's when we're going to, start this in the next season.
Yeah,
well, maybe in the next season, because the next season is, never really comes. And then, I wrote a book on the empty nest, finding joy in the empty nest. And when I started interviewing people on it, they said, well, we put so much stuff under the mat, and one of it was our physical intimacy. And now we're kind of getting reacquainted, either for good or for not so good, because they hadn't put energy into it. And I think at every stage of our marriage, we have to do that. I want to talk about from a woman's viewpoint, because I'll hear women talk to me when I'm speaking on marriage about their body. I speak quite a bit on physical intimacy. And so I'm always amazed, and I appreciate their honesty, that a woman will come up to me and say, well, I hate my body. I want to have physical intimacy in the complete dark because I don't want my husband to look at it. And if the husband's standing there, he's like, it doesn't bother me at all, whatever it is. But talk about body image. I thought you did a really good job in your book on dealing with a woman's body image. You could talk to 10 women, and they will tell you what they hate about their bodies. I mean, it's like what one woman loves, the other one hates. I hate my legs. I've got too much of this, not enough of that. And it's crazy because over history, what the right body was, or the good-looking body, or what was sexual, sensual, has changed. And a lot of times we allow the culture to determine what it is that we're supposed to look like. And we have to, as women, and I'm talking to myself here too, we have to throw out all of those images and remember, when we are in a closed, locked door, I recommend locks on the door if you're raising children, it's just two of you. It's just you two. He's not looking at the lumps and bumps or how your nose is crooked and that bothers you so much. He's looking at the things that he enjoys and what he likes about your physique. Yeah. So when a husband is saying, I love this about you, don't question that. Just accept it and go,
Yeah, that's right. That's right. I am that. And believe him when he says, I like the way you look. I like this about you. I like that. We have to choose because there's nobody else around. If you were on a desert island, it was just the two of you wouldn't care. You'd see nobody else, and whatever you were was perfect, and that's it. And that's how we have to approach our intimacy with our spouses because it's just the two of you. No one else is there. So you might as well have fun. Just like when you're on a roller coaster. Nobody cares how big your legs are when you're on your roller coaster. You're having a good time. You're throwing your hands up. You're having a great time. Same thing with the, rodeo in the bedroom. You just got to take that roller coaster and throw your hands up and have a great time.
We got metaphors flying all over the place with roller coaster and rodeo, but I appreciate that. And you know what's interesting, and it didn't even dawn on me, to be honest, until you started talking about it, is men need to be able to say to their woman often how much they appreciate them. And like you said, I mean, emotional intimacy precedes physical intimacy for a woman, of course, but also the fact that when a man compliments his wife, and nobody's perfect, and there are lumps and bumps. And as you get older, there's more lumps and there's more bumps, I have a feeling. But the point being is that it's important for us to treasure our spouse. And what you're saying is, women struggle with body image, period. Hey, we're going to take a real quick break. And when we come back, we're actually going to talk about the libido. And sometimes in a relationship, hey, the male's a little bit more energized than the female is. And we'll talk about just how that all works out. Doesn't always take that, but most of the time that's it. So we'll take a break. We'll be right back. Don't go away. I'm Jim Burns. We're talking to Lucille Williams.
Here's the host of Embracing Your Season, Paige Klingenpeel, with a special message.
Hey friends, I want to tell you a little bit about HomeWord. HomeWord is a not-for-profit ministry reaching the world to help families succeed. We would love to invite you to become a partner. This is an exciting way to give back to support families across the world. Your prayers and financial support goes directly to make a difference in this. Your gift of any amount will help HomeWord continue to provide free podcasts, blogs, YouTube channels, and many other resources to help marriages and families succeed. We believe that you can reach out to parents and marriages to bring hope and healing that will change the trajectory of families for eternity. Your prayers and financial support is so important to everything that we do. So if you feel led, go to homeword.com and click the donate button.
Welcome back. I'm very excited that we have Lucille Williams. Her book is called The Intimacy You Crave. Check it out. It's a great book. It's actually written for women, but like I said, I read the book. I liked it a lot. So I think anybody can get a lot out of it. And, sexual intimacy in a marriage is so key to a healthy, happy relationship. And again, everybody is going to look at it differently. Lucille, I was thinking before the little break, I was thinking that, men and women look at sexual things differently in terms of their relationship. And sometimes the libido is different, where a man might have a greater libido, a woman may not. I mean, it's the opposite with some, but about 80% of men, I'm told, probably have a stronger libido than women. And then that other 20%, the women have a stronger. What do you say to them? I felt like you did a really good job with this, but what do you say to the couple who's trying to embrace kind of the different way and different approaches of their sexuality?
Mm-hmm. Well, as you age, my husband and I are empty nesters now. So I can look back on what we did and what we made a priority and did it work? And I can say that, yes, it did, because it's like we're at our honeymoon every day. And I literally cannot keep my hands off that man. I mean, I'm not exaggerating. You can call each one of my kids and they will tell you that. But what we made a priority, he always made talking to me and hearing me and showing empathy and connecting to me and talking. He made that a priority.
Yeah.
And then I made our physical connection a priority, not just for him, but for me too. I think a lot of times we as women think, oh, well, I don't need that as much as my husband does. But really, that's not true. I think in some ways we need it more. We just as women, I think, are able to turn it off easier. Whereas a man sometimes can't really turn it off. So we can, we can do things to turn it on and we can do things to turn it off. Like for instance, how many of you women out there want to get naked with your husband when you're mad at him? Doesn't happen. So we need to work on we need to work. If we feel anger, we need to take care of that. We need to go, okay, why am I feeling angry? What do I need to fix this? Because if anything's going to come between me wanting to get with him, we need to fix that. But a man, sometimes anger doesn't, like, okay, he might be, that may not stop him.
Right.
So we need to make things a priority that are going to keep our marriage fresh and healthy for the long run. And we need to build those into our marriage as something that we continually do, date nights, talking, making sure we do have fun in the bedroom, keep those things a priority. And it pays off like crazy, because once those kids are gone, wow, it's like the best time ever. And I think, Jim, you could testify to that too.
Well, what's interesting about it when you say that, yes, I think I've told people often, study your spouse. What are their needs? What do they like? What don't they like? Whatever. Study your spouse. Because honestly, I think sometimes we don't do that. And what I hear you saying, even when it comes to the bedroom, that we need to study our spouse, know what they want, how they want to be cared for. You just described what your husband Mike is like in terms of showing empathy. The list you just gave. There's a lot of women who would say, "I'm starving for empathy. I'm starving for somebody who's going to listen to me. I'm starving for somebody who's going to meet my emotional needs." But the result, interesting enough, is when a man does that with a woman and connects emotionally, then physically, of course, it is almost always better. Now, fascinating enough when you said that, right? My next question to you that I'd written down because it was in your book, and I just thought it was so well said, and you talked about being angry. But one of the things you said, and you said this to women, but I think this is for men too, but you said if a woman is constantly being negative, nagging, criticizing, critical, you called it shooting your husband down, was the phrase that I remember from your book. Well, they're sticking a dagger in his heart. And you said that if they do that, then it's not going to probably be as good in the sex department because, again, they're being so negative. I think you said something about you don't want to mother them. Now, all mothers aren't like that. But again, it's the definition of moms. Do this right, do this better, wear this, don't eat that, whatever. If that's the case, what can a woman do if that's her bent? That's her natural bent to be negative Nancy, or a man. If it's negative Ned, what can they do besides just, relearn how to communicate, I guess?
Well, they really have to, first you have to acknowledge it. If you realize that that's you, I mean, good for you for saying, okay, that's me.
Yeah.
But then you have to take another step and go, is this best for me? Is this best for my marriage? Because nobody wants to be the person that is looking at their spouse going, oh, this is wrong and that's wrong. And I don't like this and I don't like that. I mean, the happiest men are the men who have wives that they can please. That's what every man wants. They want a woman they can please. But inside of every man is that little boy still. And again, we don't want to be their mom, but little boys like encouragement. And who doesn't? Men and women. We like someone to say, hey, good job. I'm proud of you. I mean, anytime my husband says to me, oh, honey, I'm so proud of you for doing that. Oh, I just light up. Like it's just amazing to hear those words. And so when we're lavishing our spouse with praise and looking for the good, continually looking for the good in them, it just builds into the marriage. And when we're criticizing, when we're saying, oh, you didn't do that right, like let's say they emptied the dishwasher, but they didn't do it right. Well, do you think he's going to do it? Do you think he's going to empty it again if you say, oh, you did it all wrong? Why'd you do it like that? No, that's one thing I had to learn. Zip it. If he does something, look, honey, I did this for you. And you're seeing it's upside down or something. You're like, oh, that's great. And just don't say anything. Just be, thank you. This is great. And then later you can go fix it. But be appreciative in the moment if you want them to do it again.
I love that you said that. I actually am right now on towel folding restriction because Kathy says, you fold towels wrong. They don't fit in our cupboard. And
well,
so
she's
right. She said, I'd rather do it myself. And I think she thought she was punishing me. And like, are you okay with that? And I'm like, sure, I'm fine. Because now I don't have to fold the towels. I fold, other things. But I just laughed that is our household sometimes. And yet what I hear you saying is, if there's constant nagging, constant negativity, they're not going to go, oh, great, let's now be intimate. It's not on either side. And so we have to sometimes hold our tongue, watch how we do that. I mean, there's a time to have conflict and there's a time to do it right and to fight fair. but a lot of us don't do it that way. Now, I've got to ask you, because it's the subtitle of your book, and it's called The Straight Talk About Sex and Pancakes. So it's the intimacy we crave, but I got to ask you about the pancake story. Oh, pancakes. What do you mean by pancakes? What's that all about?
Yeah, the pancakes is basically one chapter in the book. It has to do with fantasies, women and fantasies. And the whole reason I put that in there is because for some reason, it just seems like, now this isn't everyone, we talk in generalities, but women have a hard time expressing what they want and what they need. And that isn't just in general, but it also goes into the bedroom. And so I encourage women to say, it's okay. Like if you want to go for a walk or go out in the rain or just do something different. Sometimes we're embarrassed to tell our husbands about that, but usually they're totally game. Like when you come up with something that you think is really silly and maybe a little embarrassing, and I give some examples of possible fantasies that are super silly and funny. I remember when I first sent the chapter to my agent, she wrote back, I can't stop laughing because she just thought it was so funny because they are kind of silly, but some women have those types of feelings. Like there's nothing that's off limits, but we need to be able to tell our spouse, hey, this is what I want. And do you think we can do this? And sometimes we don't do that.
Don't you think it's harder? They have no problem saying, here's what I want in, at the house, in the kitchen or whatever. But when it comes to sexuality, for some reason that sounds, even as married people, that sounds dirty, or it sounds, so they don't say it. Yeah. But even saying that, Kathy and I had this experience a while back, and I speak on it sometimes. I'll use this illustration, but I say to couples all this time, well, tell them what you want, tell them what you need, not just talking about sex and sexuality.
Right.
And so, like Kathy said to me after all of our years of marriage, she said, hey, I love going to the movies with you, but you always hold my hand. And I'm like, yeah. And she goes, I want you to put your arm around me. So after all these years, so of course, the next time we go to the movies, I put my arm around her. And it lasted for like 30 minutes. My arm was dead. I didn't really know how to set it right. And so I kind of take it down. She just takes my hand and puts it back. So I've now figured out how to make it more comfortable. But, she had to tell me, I wanted to please her. I honestly didn't know what to do. And I think that happens with us many times. Now, I want to move to another aspect. We've been talking about intimacy, and there's spiritual intimacy as well. And no holds back with your book. You talk about spiritual intimacy. We don't always talk deeply spiritual on this podcast. Sometimes we do, but, unashamedly Christian here. And there's an intimacy with God, and there's an intimacy with our sexuality. And you actually kind of place that together. I think that's really healthy. What do you mean by how do we have an intimate relationship with God and an intimate relationship with our spouse? And how does that improve the relationship with our spouse?
If one was to look throughout the Bible, and Jim, I know you know this, God talks about sex.
Yeah.
He created it.
Right.
A lot. And when you read certain chapters, you could blush. You don't want to read that stuff with your grandma. You will blush. Right. And God created it. He created it as a connection for husbands and wives. And he wants it to be good. He wants it to be a good, intimate connection because you can't have that connection with other people, only your spouse. And God created, so it's miraculous when you are connected to God and then you connect to your spouse and you trust each other. It's the way God designed it, and it'll blow your mind.
Yeah. It is important to acknowledge that God created sex, that God sees it as very good in the context of marriage, that, he wants us to be united. And, even Jesus said that. We were on a previous podcast, we were talking about the fact that Kathy says praying together is sexy. and she tells couples that if they can get spiritually intimate, that will improve their physical intimacy. I think you believe that too.
Oh, yes. She's right on with that. Absolutely.
Well, speak to the man or the woman who they really want this. We're talking about sexual intimacy. They want it in a different way. It's not been meeting their needs. What can they do, practically speaking, to begin to come together in a way that maybe they haven't come together? Obviously, they're probably having sexual relationships, but it's not the intimacy that they crave. What do they do?
Well, first step is you go to God and you talk to God about this, because it's God's will that you have a healthy sexual relationship with your spouse. That's God's will. So, what is God's will in my life? Well, that's one right there for everyone. If you're married, that is one of God's will in your life. He wants you to have that. So first go to God and be realistic about what's going on. And then you need to think, well, do I need to talk to my spouse about this? Sometimes it's us. It's between our ears. It's what's going on in our head that's causing us to have a disconnect. Because if all day long we have ramblings of what we don't like about our spouse, oh, he left his shoes and the toilet seat's open and this is and that, you're not going to want to have a good time with them. So sometimes we can fix it just by our thoughts. So you check that. But if you're doing everything on your side that you feel like you could do, then you just see if you can have a conversation. Just say, hey, can we talk about this?
Sure.
I don't understand where, and sometimes, I mean, I've talked to wives where I've encouraged them to talk to their spouse, and then a really difficult conversation would ensue after that. And they'd have to hear what their husbands had to say. And it could be anywhere from, you know what, you're just nagging me all the time, so I just kind of want to stay away from you. Ooh, that's hard to hear. Or, you stopped taking care of yourself 10 years ago. And quite frankly, I just don't really like looking at you like I did 10 years ago or when we first got married. Ouch, that's hard to hear. And, or, you've been complaining about my job and my work, and that just makes me feel so emasculated, and I just don't want to be close to you anymore. And that goes both ways. But,
Sure.
So when you open up those conversations, sometimes you can hear stuff that's really difficult. So you have to be ready to hear it. Say, okay, I hear you. And what is our fix? What can we do to fix it? And, sometimes it's as simple as just trying something different. Maybe they both want to do something different, but they're both embarrassed to say. And so no one says anything. I mean, I know, like my husband, he can get me to blush in 3 seconds. And no one else has to be in the room. He can and he laughs every time. It's kind of like a running joke that we have. He does things to make me blush, and he just laughs. And I mean, it's been 42 years. He's like, you're blushing after 42 years. And I don't know what it is. It's just kind of our nature, but it's something that you could tackle together and have those honest conversations and say, what do we need to do to fix it? And you don't be critical, but approach it with the idea that we're going to make it better. So we're going to talk through these tough conversations.
That's great, Lucille. Thank you. Great words of wisdom today. I think you helped a lot of people just by talking as openly as you did about this very important subject, because I think there's a lot of people who struggle. I look out in a room when I'm speaking on marriage, and I do that a lot, and about 50%, I just look at 50% are struggling in this area, and 50% probably are doing a little better, but it's complicated. And it doesn't have to be. So again, thank you. I recommend that you get her book, The Intimacy You Crave. Go to LouSays.com. You can buy this book at LouSays.com, or you can buy it books where books are sold anywhere. And get to know Lucille. She has great material for you. Great product. You can see that she's an incredible person, and what a privilege to have you on today. Thank you.
Thank you. It's been a privilege to be on your podcast.
So great. Hey, and before we go, let me close with this. First of all, I just want to give you the facts. We're going to talk about sex. Sex is fun. We heard that. Sex is created by God. Sex is pleasurable. Sex can be complicated. Sex is deeply intimate. It's sacred. And it's actually a form of communication. What you just heard us say, it kind of takes work. Never thought when I first got married that it was going to take work. And I'm saying that the sexual and intimate relationship with my wife of all these years is now better because we worked at it. And I'm suggesting to you that you do all that you can to work at it. Jesus said it this way. And, people sometimes think, well, Jesus didn't talk about sex. Yes, he did. And actually, as Lou said, the Bible is filled with different sexual connotations. And I mean, like it can make you blush. But Jesus said this in Matthew 19:4, he said, a man will leave his father and mother, be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. That's about sexuality, by the way. The Greek word for united means to be bonded. And so sexual intimacy can bond you. That's why I'm not for sexual intimacy outside of marriage, because you get bonded with somebody else. I mean, that's also why the Bible's clear on adultery and what an old term, fornication, which just means having sex with someone that you're not married to, because you can get bonded to that in a negative way. But in a positive way, this bonds you. And so let me just close with you thinking about this. I call it a theology of healthy sexuality. Yes, theology, God, study of God, healthy sexuality, you pull these together, and it's what we've already said. God created sex, and God created sex not only when he created male and female, he said this is very good. And so the creation of male and female is a very good thing. But the Bible also says this, and this is found in Proverbs 4:28. It says, guard your heart. Guard your heart above all else, for it determines the course of your life. And it's important for you to make sure that you also put those boundaries in. That's a part of what a theology of healthy sexuality is. And believe it or not, that's what we've partly been talking about today. And I'm so grateful that Lucille was with us. Great podcast today. And again, my thanks to Lucille. Also, my thanks to producer Mike Segovia, HomeWord team, Cindy Ward, Kelly Fellows, Elijah Hamilton. Until next time, I am Jim Burns, and we're going to help families succeed. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks for joining us for this edition of HomeWord with Jim Burns. Be sure to check out Jim's latest books, courses, and blogs at HomeWord.com. While you're there, you can book Jim for your next speaking event. Just click on the Seminar Request tab and fill out the information. Take some time to scroll around and see all of the resources we have available for you to help your family succeed. Once again, all of this can be found at HomeWord.com. Also, be sure to follow Jim and HomeWord on all their social media pages, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. Well, that's all the time we have for today. Thanks again for joining us. Be sure to tune in next week for another edition of HomeWord with Jim Burns. HomeWord with Jim Burns, helping families succeed.